She didn't walk into that club like someone going to work. She walked in like someone who owned the truth inside it. And the worst part? I had been paying her rent for months, thinking she was barely surviving. I didn't know I was funding a lie that was sitting inside one of the most secretive VIP clubs in the city. I was 28. She was 26. We lived in a one-bedroom flat above a kebab shop on the corner of a street that smelled of grease and wet bins at night. The rent had gone up twice in 18 months. Every envelope on the kitchen table carried a red stamp or a final notice. We ate rice and beans most weeks, sometimes with cheap chicken if her tips were decent. She worked hospitality night shifts. That was the phrase she used. She left the flat at 1940 most evenings, dressed in a plain black top and jeans, hair tied back tight. She came back between 3 o'clock and 4:30, shoes in hand so she wouldn't wake me. Her eyes were always heavy. Sometimes her clothes carried the sour bite of spilled beer. Other times she smelled like something sharper, something that cost money. She said customers knocked drinks over the bar and it got on her. I accepted it. The money never quite matched the story. She brought home cash in small crumpled notes, never enough to cover the shortfall but enough to keep us floating. I saw the bank app on her phone once when she left it charging. A deposit of £400 appeared at 2:17 on a Thursday. Another $350 at 1:55 the following week. Hospitality wages don't land at 2 in the morning. She said it was tips, paid out after close. I nodded and made tea. At 23:40 one night I couldn't sleep. The radiator in the living room clanked every 20 minutes. I sat at the small table and opened the folder where we kept bills. Her pay slips were there, thin printed sheets from the agency. They showed 42 hours a month. The numbers on the bank statement told a different count. She walked in at 3:22, moving quietly. I stayed at the table. She didn't notice me at first. She slipped her jacket off, hung it on the hook by the door. The lining caught the light from the street lamp outside. A faint shimmer of something expensive clung to the fabric. Not the cheap perfume she usually wore. This one sat heavier in the air. She went straight to the shower without speaking. Water ran for 20 minutes. When she came out her hair was wet and she smelled only of our supermarket soap. She crawled into bed beside me and was asleep in minutes. Her breathing was steady, almost too steady. I lay there until the sky turned gray at 5:50. The numbers kept turning in my head. The late deposits. The perfume that didn't belong to spilled drinks. The way she never wanted me to pick her up from work. The small smile she gave when I asked how her shift went. The kind of smile that ended the conversation. Her story only held together if you never looked at the edges. I had stopped looking at the edges for a long time. Until the night the numbers stopped adding up at all. It started with rent day. The 3rd of the month. I sat at the kitchen table at 8:15 with the landlord's letter and 2 empty mugs. She came out of the bedroom already dressed, hair still damp from the shower. She said hours had been cut. Things were slow at the venue. Her share would be short this time. I moved money from my own account to cover it without comment. Her phone lay charging on the counter, screen face up. At 8:27 a notification slid down. Then another. Then a third. Each one showed a deposit. One for £180 at 2:41. Another for £220 at 3:12. A third for £95 at 4:03. No company name. Just reference codes that looked random. The amounts were too clean, too deliberate. Not tips scraped together at the end of a shift. I didn't say anything. I simply watched her leave at 19:35 like every other evening. The next week the pattern sharpened. She started adjusting her schedule out loud while I was in the room. Late shifts became changed shifts. A text would arrive and she would glance at it, then tell me she had to cover for someone. She left earlier some nights, 18:50 instead of 19:40. Other nights she stayed out until 5:10. When I asked where exactly the new venue was, she gave the same small smile she always used when the conversation needed to end. Then she changed the subject by checking the time on her watch. I began noting the times in the back of an old notebook. 23:40, phone on silent in the bathroom. 1:55, soft footsteps in the hallway after I pretended to be asleep. 4:22, the faint click of her bag being set down by the door. One morning at 7:50, I woke to find her already gone. She had left a note on the table saying she picked up an extra morning cleanup shift. The note was written on the back of her receipt. The receipt was from a hotel bar in the city center, 20 minutes by taxi from our flat. The total on the receipt was £87 for 2 drinks. The date was 3 nights earlier. I folded the receipt and put it back exactly where I found it. She returned at 14:30 that afternoon carrying 2 bags of shopping she paid for in cash. Fresh fruit, decent coffee, a bottle of wine we couldn't usually afford. She placed everything on the counter without explanation. Her eyes moved over the table once, checking if anything had been touched. The deposits kept arriving at odd hours. The schedule kept shifting. The small smile kept appearing whenever the questions edged too close. Something wasn't simply missing from her story. It was being kept out of sight on purpose. And I was no longer sure how much longer I could pretend not to notice. I started tracking her patterns without saying a word. She left at 20:55 most nights. Black coat buttoned high, hair loose, no uniform, no staff badge, no sensible shoes for a long shift. She carried only a small clutch. I watched from the window as she turned left at the corner, instead of right toward the bus stop she always mentioned. One night at 21:03 I followed. I kept 30 meters back, staying in the shadows of parked cars. She didn't head for public transport. She raised her hand at the main road and a black taxi stopped immediately. I caught the next one and told the driver to keep distance. We crossed the river and moved deep into the west of the city. The streets grew wider, the lights brighter, the buildings taller. She stepped out at 21:47 near a quiet block lined with tinted windows and polished stone. Expensive cars idled at the curb. No neon signs, no queue, no name above the entrance. Only a small silver emblem etched into the glass door. She walked past the main entrance and turned toward a narrow side alley. A man in a dark suit stood there. He saw her coming, gave a single nod, and opened the door without checking anything. She disappeared inside. It wasn't staff entry. It was the kind of nod given to someone who belonged. I stayed across the street in the cold until 2:10. Men in tailored coats left laughing, voices loud, stepping into waiting cars that smelled of leather even from a distance. Women left in small groups, dresses catching the streetlight. None of them looked like they had worked a hospitality shift. At 3:35 she came out alone. Her posture was straighter. Her steps were measured. She looked reset, like the night had emptied something from her and filled it with something else. She hailed another taxi and left. I didn't follow. The next morning I began digging. No hospitality venue in the city matched her description. No agency listed her name. No payroll records appeared under any of the 3 company names she had once mentioned in passing. Her bank statements showed deposits arriving between 3 o'clock and 4:30, always just under the reporting limit, always from different account numbers, never the same sender twice. The timing was the worst part. Every deposit landed within 90 minutes of her leaving that building. Not before she left the flat. Not during a supposed shift. After. Structured, deliberate, clean. She wasn't clocking in for wages. She was being compensated for whatever happened behind that unmarked door. I sat at the kitchen table at 6:20 with the notebook open, staring at the columns of times and amounts. The flat felt smaller than ever, and I still had no idea what exactly she was selling inside that place, or who was buying it. I finally confronted her at 2:47. The flat was dark except for the single lamp above the kitchen table. She had just come through the door, coat still on, heels in her hand. I sat where she could see me and spoke without raising my voice. I told her I had followed her. I told her about the unmarked building. I told her the deposits no longer looked like wages. She stopped moving. She placed the heels neatly by the door, hung the coat, then walked over and sat down across from me. Her hands rested flat on the table. She studied my face for several seconds, as if weighing how much I could carry. Then she began to speak. She did not work at the club. She went there because someone paid her to be present when certain men arrived. She was not staff. She was not there for entertainment. She was placed close enough to watch, to remember faces, conversation, small gestures, and to stay silent about everything she saw. She described it quietly, without flourish. A controlled presence. A witness kept on retainer. The clients were powerful, careful, and they conducted business that could never appear in any record. Her role was to sit at the right table, smile at the right moment, and leave with nothing written down. Payment arrived afterward, always in small fragments from different accounts. She spoke as if the system had simply appeared around her one day, and she had stepped into it because the rent was due and the alternative was worse. She did not sound proud. She did not sound ashamed. She sounded like someone reciting the rules of a game she had not invented, but could not walk away from without consequences. I listened until 3:20. The radiator ticked in the corner. Outside, a delivery van rumbled past. She never raised her voice. She never looked away. When she finished, she stood up, filled a glass with water, drank it slowly, then set the glass in the sink. There were still gaps in what she had told me. Who exactly placed her there? Who collected the observations? What happened if she ever refused a night? Whether the men knew they were being watched or simply assumed she was another pretty face in the room. She walked to the bedroom door and paused. She turned slightly, as if considering one more sentence, then thought better of it. Instead, she only said the arrangement had been running for 14 months. Then she closed the bedroom door behind her. I remained at the table until the sky outside turned pale at 5:55. The flat felt heavier now, as if the walls had moved closer during the conversation, and I understood that what she had given me was only the first layer. Whatever else she was protecting inside that building was still locked away. I asked her why she had never told me. She remained seated at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of the empty water glass. The clock on the wall read 3:12. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because I couldn't afford to know. The sentence landed between us and stayed there. She continued without pause. She had been approached during a month when the rent notice sat unopened for 11 days. A woman she met at the bar where she used to work offered money for simple presents. No touching, no serving drinks, no dancing. Just sit at certain tables when certain men arrived, listen, remember, and never speak of it afterward. The first payment cleared the arrears in one night. Over the following months the arrangement tightened. She could not simply decide to stay home. Not with words or threats, but with quiet implications. A missed night meant a smaller deposit. A second missed night meant a polite message asking if everything was all right. A third brought silence and the knowledge that someone else would fill the seat within hours. Replaceable people in that circle did not lose jobs. They lost visibility. They stopped appearing in any conversation that mattered. She spoke evenly, as if reading terms she had memorized long ago. I sat opposite her and felt the shift happen inside my chest. The target moved. It was no longer her face across the table. It was the unseen structure that had folded itself around her life and now around mine. At 3:41 she stood up and walked to the window. She pulled the curtain back an inch and looked down at the empty street. Then she let it fall again. She added one more detail before leaving the room. The clients were not there for pleasure alone. They conducted conversations that could ruin careers, shift contracts, bury investigations. Her presence ensured there was always a witness who could be discredited if anything ever surfaced. A pretty face from nowhere whose word would never stand against theirs. She did not explain why they had chosen her specifically. She only said the system preferred women who needed the money badly enough to stay quiet and who looked like they belonged in the room without asking questions. She moved to the bedroom at 3:55. The door clicked shut behind her. I stayed at the table until 6:20, the notebook open, the columns of times and deposits now carrying new weight. The question that refused to leave was simple and sharp. What exactly were those men doing in that unmarked building that required paid silence and a living witness who could be thrown away at any moment? And why had they decided she was the perfect shape for the role? I went back to the club on a Tuesday night. Not to speak to her. Not to stop anything. Only to watch and understand what kind of world she stepped into each evening. I arrived at 2210 and positioned myself in the shadow of a closed cafe across the street. The air was cold enough to numb my fingers inside my pockets. I stayed longer this time. At 22:47, a black Mercedes pulled up. Two men stepped out quickly. Security moved in smooth coordination, blocking the pavement so no passing car could catch a clear view. I recognized one of the faces from evening news broadcasts. A politician whose name appeared in every headline about upcoming legislation. He disappeared through the side entrance without hesitation. 10 minutes later, another car arrived. This time, the passenger was a man whose company had just won a major government contract. Same routine. Same instant shielding by the suited figures at the door. No cameras. No phones raised. No records. Then I saw her. At 23:19, she arrived on foot from the side alley. Same black coat. Same measured steps. She paused briefly at the entrance, scanned the street once, and went inside. Through the large front window, I caught a glimpse of her settling at a low table near the back. Her face carried the same calm control I had seen before. Our eyes met. She was turning her head toward the window when she noticed me standing motionless across the street. For 2 full seconds, everything froze. Her expression did not change for anyone else in the room. But I saw the shift in her eyes. Not fear of the men around her. Not fear of the building itself. Fear that I had seen too much of what she was paid to contain. She looked away first. She came home at 1:55, earlier than usual. The key turned in the lock with a soft click. She closed the door behind her, but did not take off her coat. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, then spoke without moving closer. "You shouldn't have come here." She said it quietly, almost under her breath. Then she walked past me into the bedroom and shut the door. I remained in the living room until 3:40, lights off, listening to the occasional car pass outside. The weight had changed. This was no longer only her secret. By standing across that street and letting her see me, I had stepped into the same silent arrangement. I was now another pair of eyes that had witnessed the untouchable men entering the unmarked building. Another person who knew the shape of the system. And the system, I understood, did not like loose threads. Whatever protection her silence had bought her was now stretched thin enough to cover both of us. I still didn't know what exactly those men were buying with their money and their fear of being seen. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. From that night forward, I was no longer watching from the outside. The next days changed everything. She stopped leaving at 20:55. For 4 straight nights, the black coat stayed on the hook by the door. No taxis. No side entrance. No deposits appearing between 3 o'clock and 4:30. The flat grew quieter than it had ever been. We moved around each other like two people sharing space after a storm neither of us had predicted. At 8:15 each morning, I checked the bank app out of habit. 0 new credits. The usual red notices on the kitchen table looked sharper without her contribution. She spent the hours in the bedroom with the door half open, reading on her phone or staring at the ceiling. I sat at the small table and paid what bills I could with my own wages. Tension remained in every room. It lived in the way she glanced at her silent phone at 22:40. In the way I listened for footsteps on the stairs that never came. In the way neither of us turned on the television because any noise felt like it might crack the fragile pause we were living inside. We did not break up. We did not talk about fixing anything. We simply continued breathing the same air, eating the same rice and beans, sleeping back to back in the narrow bed. On the 5th night at 23:17, she finally spoke. She told me the people who ran the arrangement had noticed her absence. A short message had arrived asking if everything was all right. Nothing explicit. Just a question that carried its own quiet threat. She showed me the screen for 3 seconds, then deleted the thread. I realized then that the hardest part was not the lies she had told me for 14 months. It was understanding exactly why she had needed to tell them. The rent still needed paying. The bills still arrived on the 3rd. The system she had stepped into did not release people simply because they wanted out. It waited, watched, and reminded them of how easily a seat at the unmarked table could be filled by someone else. At 2:10 on the 6th night, her phone lit up once on the kitchen counter. A single deposit appeared, smaller than usual. Just enough to cover the immediate shortfall. She looked at the notification, then at me, and said nothing. We existed in the aftermath like two survivors measuring the damage without naming it. The silence between us was no longer just absence of words. It was the knowledge that whatever she had seen inside that building, whatever those powerful men had paid to keep hidden, now sat inside our flat as well. And neither of us knew how long the pause would last before the arrangement decided it was time for her to return. Or what price would be demanded if she refused again. I used to think secrets were simple. Either you were honest, or you weren't. But some secrets aren't choices. They're environments, systems, pressure, survival disguised as deception. And sometimes the person you think is hiding from you is actually hiding for you. I still don't know everything she saw inside that club. And maybe I never will. But I learned something I can't unlearn. The most dangerous lies aren't told to destroy trust. They're told to protect the fragile world built on top of it.